Multinational corporations can have revenues larger than countries, able to hold even governments to ransom. But some of these companies are now in the dock, charged with corruption, unlawful killing, and even war crimes. Charges brought by ordinary people of extraordinary courage. Juliana Ruhfus tells the remarkable stories of the corporations on trial. Hello everyone, this is People in Power, Corporations on Trial. I'm Summer El-Shahat. This week, Juliana Ruhfus is in the not-so-frozen north.
Look at this. This is not normal. This was not normal before 2004.
Kivalina is a small settlement on Alaska's northwest coast, a village whose inhabitants depend on the hunting and fishing skills handed down to them by their forebears. But as the world heats up and the ice around Kivalina melts, this ancient way of life is threatened. So too is the continued survival of the village itself. In response, Kivalina's residents have brought a charge against some of the world's largest oil and energy companies, not only for contributing to global warming, but for conspiring to mislead us all about its effects.
I started my career in Alaska nearly 20 years ago, working with the Native American Rights Fund. And over time, I began to see that the way of life that my clients relied upon was changing. They still very much were subsistence people, but they were seeing dramatic changes in their environment. Migrations were changing. The ice was melting at a much faster rate, making it much more difficult for coastal communities to be able to get out and hunt for their marine mammals. I was hearing all the time about winter travel being dangerous because people were going through the ice. And I realized that probably the biggest danger to ongoing subsistence activities was global climate change.
Heather Kendall Miller is one of the lead lawyers representing the native Alaskan village of Kivalina in a global warming lawsuit which, if successful, could change the world. The 400-strong Inupiat community is suing the world's major oil and energy companies, claiming that they are responsible for the global warming which is ruining the lives of Kivalina's people. Exactly how is most evident during the autumn and spring storm seasons. Enoch Adams, a Kivalina city councilman, takes me to see the damage.
Of course, we had a huge storm in 2004. We lost quite a bit of beach, probably about 100 feet, 150 feet in some areas. Quite a bit of damage took place here.
Kivalina is located on a long, thin barrier reef that is literally being washed into the sea. Warmer temperatures mean that the sea ice that normally formed along the shoreline every October no longer does. And without it, there is no protection from seasonal storms. Erosion has shrunk the island by nearly 20 acres over the past 50 years.
It was amazing how quickly this erosion was taking place. You could watch it right in front of your eyes. And you're trying everything you can to go ahead and stop it, but you can't. Where we're standing on is a pile of gravel, and underneath this pile is 2 layers of those bags. We put 500 bags in this area underneath us.
So, finally decided to bake bread today.
Enoch Adams and his mother Lucy explained that the Inupiats did not choose to move onto the barrier reef, which is now Kivalina. Over a century ago, the federal government built a school for the native Alaskans and forced the nomadic people to settle.
And told them that they built a school here and that their children have to attend. And if they didn't attend, if their children were not made to come to school, the parents would be arrested and put in jail. The parents saw the need to comply with the law. They built homes here where the government built a school. And that's basically how Kivalina was established.
As a native Alaskan community, Kivalina enjoys special status under U.S. federal law, which enables it to launch a lawsuit on behalf of its members. Due to the erosion, Kivalina is claiming direct injury as a result of global warming. The case has grown out of the lawyer's close cooperation with Kivalina's tribal office and with Colleen Swan, Kivalina's tribal administrator.
After 2006, when the first seawall failed, we were, so angry that decisions were made for us so many times, even all the way up to 2006. I had already talked with our attorney saying, we need to sue somebody over this. This shouldn't have happened.
And so the wheels were set in motion for a lawsuit against 23 of the world's biggest oil and energy companies. Kivalina's complaint accuses them of having contributed directly to global warming through the emissions of greenhouse gases. Scientists have now reached consensus that climate change is happening at an alarming rate. The warmest 8 years since temperature records began have all occurred over the last decade, and experts warn that the Arctic could be ice-free by summer 2013. It's a phenomenon Kivalina's elders have long observed.
It's occurring. The climate is changing. I mean, look at this. This is not normal. This was not normal before 2004. We had rain last year in January.
That's unheard of. That's
And
never happened.
that never happened. We talked to the elders here. They said they'd never seen these kinds of conditions ever in their lifetimes. Now, because of this erosion, we've got no choice but to move. We have to move.
When we finally move the village, we're not just moving houses or people to a new site, we're changing lives. We are going to have to deal with a whole new lifestyle. Not by choice, but because it's absolutely necessary.
I don't think so.
What makes Kivalina unique is not just the willingness of the community to bring a case, but also the availability of specific research by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers into the damage and possible remedies. So this is the relocation costs associated with one specific site.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean the report looks at other sites as well?
They have, I believe they've looked at several sites, but the focus is on King Turok because it is the site that the people selected themselves. Costs?
Between $100 and $300 million is the Army Corps' estimate of the relocation costs. The lawyers have used the calculations in the report to specify the potential payout if they win.
Kivalina is the perfect plaintiff, in our opinion, for several reasons. First of all, there have been two very important governmental studies that have said Kivalina is a community that must be relocated within the very near future because it's in such a dangerous position. And they've had published studies that have been able to say it's going to cost this much money to be able to relocate it. So it puts a definite quantifiable amount on what the damage is, or the damage that has been done to this community, a community that has contributed significantly nothing to of carbon emission, and yet they're suffering so greatly.
For now, it's another warm winter in Kivalina. While some of Kivalina's younger people are looking for a more modern lifestyle, Lucy Adams still lives what she calls the good old tough way.
These are the caribou hindquarters, the best, and they're fat, real good frozen meat, or half raw, real delicious.
So who killed the caribou?
My son did.
Your son killed it?
Yeah. Without hunters, we can't have meat. Us women are just the workers at home of what they hunt. Without hunters, we can't have these things.
Jerry Norton comes from a long tradition of men who hunt and fish.
Ooh, very thin. Our ice is thinning out right now, and that's what makes it difficult, you know, to hunt. Hunting is a way of life. Always right.
Can you imagine leaving Kivalina? Can you imagine moving somewhere else?
No. I've all lived there, and this is where, you know, this is where I'll probably die too anyway. No, it's pretty hard to leave. Too shallow over here.
Too shallow for fish.
Mm-hmm. Very shallow.
With the warmer weather, the ice is still too thin to carry Jerry further out onto deeper waters where he used to catch fish.
We have a history of mistreatment. Our people's rights were violated so many times that eventually you're going to get to a point where you feel that you need to fight back. And finding the worst polluters, maybe it's time for them to start paying, because they get what I call corporate welfare. They get a lot of money from the government. And they get rich extracting oil and whatever non-renewable resources there are. They get rich off of that. So it's time for the oil companies and the energy companies to pay back for the damages to the environment.
The past 3 decades have seen a heated argument, not only debating whether global warming is caused by man, but also whether it is occurring at all. The outcome matters to Kivalina in more ways than one. A number of previous court cases holding energy companies responsible for global warming were dismissed by courts who ruled that it wasn't for them to become the referee in this scientific debate. Enter Stephen Sussman, one of America's top corporate litigation lawyers, brought onto Kivalina's legal team.
All defendants are located within their headquarters within 4 blocks of my office. And we are fighting, it's strange, we are fighting here over a lawsuit that's thousands of miles, and as you said, 40 hours away to get to Kivalina, Alaska.
Houston-based Sussman shot to fame in the 90s as a defense lawyer for tobacco giant Philip Morris. He lost the case when the plaintiffs argued that the tobacco companies had conspired to mislead the world about the dangers of smoking.
For 5 years, I represented Philip Morris. Well, it was, I must say that I probably made the wrong decision. So I'm thinking, hey, this sounds just like tobacco, only maybe this time I'll be on the right side of the docket. I'll represent the plaintiffs, not the defendants. We've been very much delayed, and it has been, by this systematic effort to mislead the public. The big oil companies and coal companies and electric utilities spent a lot of money over time to encourage bogus science to create doubt as to whether global warming was caused by man. First, whether it was occurring, and if it was occurring, what was causing it, which is exactly what the tobacco companies did. There's a conspiracy here to lie, to mislead Congress, to mislead the American public.
Sussman argues that the conspiracy charge, which he has added to the complaint, will make it impossible for the courts to dismiss the case.
Global warming may be something new, but conspiracies as old as, you know, the knights and the kings and the courts in England. I mean, everywhere. I mean, conspiracy is an idea that goes back long. You know, people are getting together to agree to do something that's wrong.
It is in Washington, D.C., capital of the nation, where the wrangling, wheeling and dealing between oil companies, lobby groups and politicians has allegedly taken place. Greenpeace International, an environmental lobby group themselves, have investigated the links between energy companies and science. Kurt Davies is research director.
Why was the energy industry so concerned about the fact that scientists began to say that global warming is man-made? What was at stake for them?
Well, for the oil industry specifically, they know that by controlling the emissions that cause global warming, carbon dioxide, you have to control the consumption of fossil fuels.
You've seen those headlines about global warming.
Ad campaigns such as these from the Center for Competitive Enterprise Institute, an organization part-funded by ExxonMobil, not only claim that glaciers aren't melting, but also talk of global warming alarmists trying to scare us.
Let's force people to cut back, they say. But we depend on those fuels to grow our food, move our children, light up our lives. And as for carbon dioxide, it isn't smog or smoke. It's what we breathe out and plants breathe in. Carbon dioxide, they call it pollution. We call it life.
I believe that the energy industry and the Global Climate Coalition knew that the weight of evidence was far greater than their portrayal of it. Exxon remained an immovable object in the denial machine, and we know that they've funded the think tanks and propaganda machine to the tune of $20 million or more, which is not a lot of money for Exxon, but it was very targeted money. It was tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars to very small shops with direct remit on climate change.
The investigative work which Kurt Davies and others have undertaken is now available on the internet.
So this is a website built to tell the story of the denial machine and how these scientists were being used as spokespeople through these think tanks and putting out a message of uncertainty and denial around global warming.
One well-known scientist, labeled a climate skeptic, is Dr. Patrick Michaels, who works at the Cato Institute in Washington. Michaels does accept that global warming is occurring, but he also says that the rate is modest and that an attempt to cut emissions is futile because we don't have the technology to do so. According to the Greenpeace website, Michaels has received money from various oil companies.
You yourself are not revealing your funding.
No, not people who don't want it.
Where does this reluctance come from to reveal funding for foundations?
Well, some people request anonymity. And if you're doing research for an anonymous donor, the name of the contract is you don't reveal the donor.
Is there a problem with receiving funding from big oil or energy companies? Do you consider that to be a problem?
I don't understand why anybody who wants to can't fund scientific research. And if that research goes through peer review and stands up to peer review, so what? Everybody's got a bias who gives something to somebody, not just industry, not just governments, environmental organizations. And my argument has always been to recognize this. And perhaps, in fact, to encourage broad support from a large number of stakeholders for research on this issue. Because, again, governments have bias, everybody does.
We requested interviews with the oil and energy companies too. They have filed a motion to dismiss the case, arguing that the alleged damage results from centuries of human activities across the entire planet, and that global warming cannot be traced to the 23 energy companies named in the complaint. None of the defendants we contacted provided us with a spokesperson, but most agreed to send a brief email reply.
Dynegy believes the plaintiff's suit lacks merit, and they intend to oppose it vigorously. BP, no comment on pending litigation. 4 days' worth of phone calls to Chevron's media relations people, no reply. ExxonMobil, no comment on pending litigation. Now Shell, didn't give us an interview either, but they did issue us with a written statement. Shell believes that the challenge of climate change should be addressed by sound government policy and not by the courts.
Do I think the best way to handle the problem is lawsuits? No, of course not. The best way to handle the problem of global warming is to have an international treaty that all the countries in the world sign, and have real sanctions if you violate it, and that limits everyone's emissions. That's the way to handle the problem. But until that happens, someone needs to make companies think that they may be responsible for the consequences of what they're doing and putting carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
What would you say to the people of Kivalina or places like Kivalina in response?
These cultures have existed for thousands of years since the end of the Ice Age, and it's quite clear that Alaska was warmer by several degrees, and they clearly were able to adapt to that.
So what would you say to the people of Kivalina today?
Why can't you adapt now if you adapted then?
Adapt how?
I don't know. They obviously did because they survived. The culture, Inuit culture, flourished and radiated.
Bearded sealskin. And this is a mountain squirrel.
Elders like Lucy Adams are now the guardians of ancient customs.
Lots of work. I do the tanning all by hand.
Traditions that could be lost along with the Inupiats' land.
These are sealskin pants to wear over their clothing for hunting.
What's most important is not what's tangible, but what is the intangible. The fact that with increasing climate change, these cultures like Kivalina that have this wonderful traditional knowledge about the land, about the cycles of the seasons and things like that, that's what's going to be lost. That will mean 20,000 years of customary and traditional knowledge gone in one generation.
Do you sometimes think about what you would do if this claim doesn't make it any further, if it gets dismissed?
Obviously, we will appeal. We'll go through the whole process, whatever it takes. If it gets thrown out, we didn't completely fail because it's brought a lot of attention, a much needed attention to the problem. And, you know, that in itself is success.
That's it for this special edition of People in Power. In the next of our series of corporations on trial, Juliana Ruhfus reports on a change of tactics in Palestine.
Today's demo was over really, really quickly because there was so much tear gas. Some of the more serious demonstrators are still here, but everybody else has just retreated.
Despite the persistence of the protesters, all this suffering has been more or less in vain, because across the security wall, the construction still continues. But Belaine has an ally, a lawyer who's taking the struggle from the contested olive groves into the courtroom.
That's next week. In the meantime, if you'd like to comment on today's report, we'd love to hear from you on aljazeera.net/English. That's it from me, and until next time, bye-bye.